Welcome to the Voices That Propel Us, stories of justice, action, and community, a space where justice meets action and community voices rise. Each episode, we bring you stories from the front lines, changemakers, disruptors, and everyday heroes who are building a more just, equitable, and liberated world. This is more than a podcast. It's a call to listen, learn, and move together. You were just listening to music from the incredibly talented Stephen Kong. You can find him on Spotify and Bandcamp. Today we have with us Natalie Holder. Natalie is an employment lawyer, and senior leaders seek her advice when implementing inclusive culture initiatives that build strong businesses. Having led global human resources compliance for Starwood Hotels and Resorts and serving as the Chief Diversity Officer for Stanford University SLAC and the United States Capitol Police, she conducts workplace investigations, develops compliance trainings, and designs seminars and workshops that focus on leadership and self-development skills. She has provided court order training and expertise in high-stakes discrimination and harassment cases involving Fox News, the New York City Fire Department, and many others. Well, hi, Natalie. Thank you so much for taking the time to share this platform with me. I'm really excited. I think you do such important work, and I can't wait to delve deeper into these topics and issues with you through this conversation. But how are you doing today?
I'm well, and thank you so much for having me as a guest on your show. I also enjoy your podcast, and I look forward to contributing to the conversation today.
Yeah, no, thank you. And just in advance, I know that what you'll be offering will be very beneficial to my listeners who are, a lot of like change makers and everything. So, I can't wait to see how this conversation goes. So, just starting off, can you take us back to the moment or experience that led you into employment law and workplace culture work?
I was backpacking through Europe.
Oh, okay.
And of all places, I was backpacking through Europe, and that was the beginning of that like kernel and seed of what led me into becoming an attorney. I had won some scholarship money earlier that year, and it was with unrestricted funds. So I could buy anything I wanted. And of course, my family thought, well, do something responsible with the money. Why don't you buy a computer or a printer? And I thought, no, I want to live in Europe for a few months. And while I was in Europe for those months, I ran across these gentlemen from Harvard. And one of them pulled me aside and said, hey, have you ever thought about doing a summer program called SEO? And this is well before like the internet and SEO optimization. And so I thought, SEO, what's that? He said, it's Sponsors for Educational Opportunity, which still exists today. And he explained that SEO had these different tracks for people who were in college and were interested in professions in finance, professions in law, and these were paid internships that were made accessible to people who oftentimes did not have access to these kinds of opportunities. And so I interviewed, I really enjoyed learning and meeting the organization, and I was selected as one of the juniors to participate in the SEO program. They placed me at this wonderful law firm for the summer, Boyce and Plimpton, in their New York office. They have offices all over the world. And it was just fascinating to see how attorneys worked, how attorneys really didn't have like set schedules, how you had to work based on getting the job done, getting the work done, and just having very smart and witty conversations with the attorneys I met. And that's how I decided to go to law school. And quite honestly, it really shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone that I would choose employment law, given that everyone in my family is involved in healthcare in some respect. Employment is, a social determinant of health. Where you work has a great deal to do with where you live, what kind of healthcare you have access to, what kind of social circles you have access to. And so the whole idea of employment law, and, people ask, well, what is an employment lawyer? Well, think of an employment lawyer as the person who helps you from hire to fire. Okay. So we're the people who help you to put together the employment agreement when you're planning to onboard someone. We're also the person who might help you with figuring out how to, sever the person if the organization is moving in a different direction, or if this person's not working up to standards or expectations. Right. On the flip side, an employee would access an employment lawyer if they want their employment agreement reviewed, if they want to understand more about how to negotiate their employment agreement. everything in between up to if, sadly, the organization and the individual are no longer on the same page, that individual would contact an employment lawyer to help them to figure out how best to leave the organization and to negotiate a departure. So that's the work that I did. And, that's the work of an employment lawyer.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I'd love to talk more about that too. So, what has shaped your personal commitment to justice and equity, specifically in the workplace?
Seeing diversity, equity, and inclusion fumbled. That's what really helps to solidify my interest in this area.
Okay.
As I mentioned, I look at employment law as being integral to so many aspects of how people can navigate the society, how they can navigate their lives, and, whether, someone's able to access opportunities that may not be offered to them. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion, as I define it, really is looking at how do you ensure that there are equal opportunities for people who are of all different backgrounds, cognitively and demographically, people who are going to bring a great deal of experiences to the organization, people who are going to bring a great deal of perspective to the organization.
Right.
I don't know of any industry in where, homogeneity really is a benefit, quite honestly. Diversity really oftentimes is that secret sauce that helps the organization to advance. There are a lot of debates as to whether or not we should still be talking about the business case for diversity. I'm going to leave that for another day, and I'm debate. But just in its essence and core, looking at, how are you ensuring that based on our employment laws, there's truly equal opportunity, and that you are ensuring that historically underrepresented groups, as well as any other group, have access to the organization. Equity is, how are you making sure that there really is an equal playing field? How are you ensuring that there are even-handed policies, practices, and procedures? When I worked for a physics laboratory, I can't tell you how many phone calls I would get from men who are looking for equitable practices. They wouldn't say it this way. They wouldn't position it this way. But when I get a phone call from a male caregiver who would complain about the hours that certain meetings were taking place, and this was post-COVID. What that individual was asking for, what that man was asking for, was equity in terms of how the work was done. That individual wanted maybe the hours of a meeting to, move back from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Why? Because that caregiver was dropping their kids off in the morning, and they wanted to make sure that they were completely present for the meeting. It wasn't that they were asking to get out of the meeting or to shirk their responsibilities. It was just that they were looking for a way to make sure that they can completely access the meeting the way that their colleagues were. And then inclusion. Inclusion really is that concept of how are we making sure that the genius that we hired you for is the genius that we're tapping into you for when you join our organization. So often we hire people thinking, or leading people to believe, you're a star. I brought you on this team. I brought you into this organization because you're good at fill in the blank. However, there is nothing more, there's nothing more trying. There's nothing more annoying to an individual who raises their hand to contribute thoughts, ideas, and suggestions, all to be shot down. And so inclusion really is that concept of how do we make sure that the people who are in our organization have a way of impacting how we're, moving forward with products, services, client care, patient care. How are we making sure that the individuals that we hired really are a part of that process? That's how I define DEI. And so when you look at the core essence of DEI, quite honestly, I've seen it fumbled in various spaces. I remember, so DEI has been around for, a number of decades now. However, I would say around like the early 2000s, that's where we started to move more from affirmative action DEI into like DEI management. And I would hear in these meetings with people who should have known better, people who were attorneys, employment attorneys, they wanted to put together, for instance, a diversity reception. Sounds like a wonderful idea. But they would say, well, we want to create a space in where our diverse attorneys will feel comfortable. And that word just really struck me. Who's not diverse? Who doesn't have or possess elements of diversity in their presentation, in their capacity, in their characteristics? And then they would say, well, we want to make sure that we invite our diverse attorneys and only our diverse attorneys. And so the whole idea that you are now excluding a group of people, that didn't sit well with me, because I really do believe in, true equal opportunity. I do believe in inviting various voices to the table, because it's through those voices that we have allyship. It's through those voices that we have collaboration that really can move an organization forward. And then ultimately, when you feel as though you've been pushed to the margins, it's not a good feeling. And so I truly did believe that, and that's really why I have focused so heavily on creating DEI initiatives and DEI practices that, number one, are sustainable, but then ultimately really do leave opportunities for various groups, and often the groups that have been excluded, to be a part of the conversation and the solutions.
Right. No, I totally agree with you too. And I love the work that you do. And also, like, with this current climate, my heart just breaks with like this dismantling of DEI, because it's something that's very near and dear to my heart. But I feel like it's something that is just a label, and people just say like, oh, I don't like DEI. But I feel like they might not even know the breakdown of which, like, each of those words mean, like how you broke it down right now. Because I feel like, I don't know, what's so controversial of, just diversity. It's so, important, and it brings so much more life, I think, to the environments that we're in. But, question I have for you, do you feel like because of this dismantling and narrative around DEI, has that been impacting your work as well right now?
I would say that, the dismantling of DEI in our federal government, it's had an impact on so many aspects of our lives. When we look at the closure of different offices, the elimination of roles, people who were put in place to, ostensibly, look forward to and create the practices that would enhance equal opportunity in organizations. It's very sad to see that going away. And even though, DEI really is so distinct from, and DEI management is distinct from, EEO, equal opportunity laws, or equal opportunity as we look at it as a practice in organizations, it's a foundation. So quite honestly, EEO, those are the laws like Title VII, the ADEA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's EEO. However, true DEI built upon that. It said, hey, if we are truly looking at making sure that organizations are accessible, organizations don't have barriers to inclusion for people based on race, age, national origin, and other protected characteristics, that is the nature of true DEI as I look at it. And I believe that, sadly, there were some entities that were going forward with DEI in, a very, let's just say, in a way that to me indicated that they were not true scholars of employment laws. They were not truly moving forward with our employment laws. And so you had a few of those situations, like the one I mentioned with the cocktail party, right? However, I would say, wholesale, that for the most part, as DEI did evolve, I found that people were becoming much more astute. They were becoming much more learned in this area, and they were becoming much more sophisticated as to how they were advancing organizational missions with this work. And so has my work been impacted? So, I work on, culture and inclusion. So culture, inclusion, and compliance. Compliance, quite honestly, is going nowhere. Organizations are always going to need to have compliance education, compliance training, and making sure that someone is looking at how their processes, how their procedures, and even ultimately their systems are set up to make sure that they're being regulated properly. But then the culture work is not just, making sure that the work is up to, is up to speed or is compliant, but it's also making sure that it lands in a way with people that they can also champion this work. And so I would say that the requests for work, it's definitely changed. So the work that I was asked to do, let's say, 4 or 5 years ago, it's definitely changed versus now.
Okay. Okay. No, thank you for sharing that. So you've worked in incredibly high stakes environments. So with that, what has that taught you about power, accountability, and leadership?
So in high stakes environments, and I would
Mm-hmm.
describe those as, spaces in where you have a great deal of risk, not
Mm-hmm.
just to reputation, but also to how your people are being treated,
Mm-hmm.
how your people are able to ensure that they're working in an environment that is safe for them. And I don't just mean physically safe. I also mean psychologically safe. I also mean
Right.
emotionally safe. And those are environments in where you do want to make sure that if you're moving forward with, number one, creating compliance, but then number two,
Mm-hmm.
creating creating an environment in where people can get their work done. It's so crucial and important that you get it right. And
Mm-hmm.
so, when I think of some of the higher stakes work that I've done, for instance, like, getting called in to help out with consent decree order trainings. So
Okay.
in order to, let's say, here's an example. So in order to settle a lawsuit, a Title VII lawsuit,
Mm-hmm.
once it's been filed in federal court, a
Uh-huh.
federal judge will only sign off on that settlement if the company that has been sued for sexual harassment, discrimination, retaliation, whatever it was, they
Mm-hmm.
have to agree to implement training that will educate the workforce about their rights and responsibilities, and ensuring that this training, or at least implementing this training in the hopes that there would be a remediation of whatever the environment was, whatever the ills were that brought about the circumstance that, ultimately resulted in a lawsuit.
Okay.
And in those environments, I find that people either are skeptical
Okay.
because they wonder, okay, so is this training really going to change anything?
Mm.
But I've often said to people in the trainings, make the best use of it. You can ask questions during the training. You can make this training something that truly is to your benefit. If you've always
Okay.
wondered, how do I complain about something? What can I complain about? Have my, would this certain situation necessarily be in violation of one of the compliance laws I mentioned?
Mm-hmm.
That's a way that employees could better use the information that, once again, is shared in a training.
Right. No, no, thank you for sharing that. And you talk about the top 10 indicators of a broken workplace culture. So can you please share what are a few that people might be experiencing right now, but not even realizing that these are red flags?
Ooh. So the top 10 indicators of a broken workplace culture,
Um,
I'll admit, they came about when I was doing research for
okay.
a conference I was speaking at. And as I mentioned, I do believe that true DEI
Mm-hmm.
focuses on the broader experience. And I'm not in any
Okay.
way minimizing the experiences of people who are historically underrepresented. However, I do believe that you do need to have all individuals involved in course correcting whatever is ailing
Mm-hmm.
an organization. And so I asked a very simple question of
Uh-huh.
people of all different backgrounds, but there was, of course, some legitimizing criteria. I wanted to make sure that everyone was gainfully employed. I wanted to make sure I was talking to people who were, in professions.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to make sure that I was speaking to people who were people who had achieved a certain level of success in their
Okay.
career. And I asked them a very basic question. Have you ever felt like an outsider?
Mm.
I asked about 200 people that question, and only one person
Okay.
said no, absolutely not. I mean, a few people kind of waffled and they wondered. Uh,
Right.
and as you asked, what are some of the indicators that might be
Mm-hmm.
happening?
Mm-hmm.
Even in asking that question, I found that people still were somewhat uncertain. And it wasn't until I started to
Okay.
really start talking through the experience of being an outsider. For
Mm-hmm.
instance, the lack of informal mentoring, that's one indicator. Uh, the experiences of dual identity, having to feel as though you have to be two different people in this life because your authentic self isn't accepted in the workplace.
Right.
The inability to recover from mistakes,
Uh-huh.
the experience of your mistakes being held to a very different standard than others mistakes in the workplace.
Yeah.
And so even the people who had experienced it,
Mm-hmm.
they had to sort of have this catharsis in the moment of, well, wait a second, that I did feel like an outsider, and this is what happened to me. And so I found that after, all these interviews, and the stories ranged, but I did find that their interview answers really fell into these 10 different buckets. And that's what the 10 different buckets of similarity, that's what I call the 10 indicators of a broken workplace culture. Because if they exist, most likely your people do not feel as though they are included. They don't feel like they're a part of the in group. And ultimately, they don't feel cared for. Feeling cared for is such an essential aspect of people feeling as though they're a part of a well culture, a culture in where they can truly feel as though they can innovate, a culture in where they feel safe, a culture in where they feel as though they can contribute to the organization. On the flip side, there are many leaders who love to talk about, oh, we want better engagement.
Right.
We want more performance out of our people, right? You've heard those stories,
yes.
right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
I would often listen to them, and I still listen to them, where they spent all of this money on like Gallup polls. And let's start with the Gallup poll. What do most organizations do with the Gallup poll after it's been conducted? They sit it on a shelf.
Right.
They go over, they'll go over it. They have a big town hall and they talk about what were some of the biggest findings. However, there are organizations that don't do anything with the data. They don't use the data to really inform how and where they can meet their people part way. And so when organizations aren't even looking at that kind of data that's been collected, imagine if you, the individual contributor, are raising thoughts and concerns and no one is listening to you, no one's attending to your questions or concerns. I worked for an organization one time where it was like the black hole, and where people felt as though when they brought a complaint or a concern to the human resources department, of which I was not a part of, but when they brought their concerns to the human resources department, they didn't know what happened to the concern. They didn't know if it was ever investigated. They never got any sort of feedback. And I thought, this is where, once again, people start to create their own stories. And so for the organization that doesn't have a proper system of feedback for its people, a proper system of investigating concerns and complaints, and ultimately, even that fundamental concern of how are my people experiencing this workplace? If you're an organization that doesn't have those three criteria, you most likely are leading in a broken workplace that has, well, you're probably leading in a workplace that has a broken workplace culture, and you don't even realize it.
Yeah, that's thank you for sharing that. That's so interesting. And I'm wondering though, for people who might be listening who might feel like they are in a broken workplace environment, like, what kind of advice can you give them for them to just start trusting in their instincts?
It's important to familiarize yourself with what even are some of the indicators of a broken workplace culture. Because one of the interesting similarities I found with everyone I interviewed, because these people were self-selecting high performers, people who had, accomplished degrees, people who had, advanced education, they were very reluctant to even acknowledge that, okay, wait a second, maybe it's not me, maybe it's the organization and where these issues are happening. For instance, there was this woman who I interviewed, and once again, incredible pedigree. She went to, actually, she was from your area. She was from the Bay Area. Well, she's from California, Bay Area.
Wonderful.
And she went to, one of the great schools, well, not name it, but one of the great schools in the Bay Area. And she landed at a law firm in where someone flat out told her that she didn't know how to write, and said that, I think that you probably don't know how to write because English may have been your second language. Now, mind you, this wasn't the case. This woman was raised in this country. This woman, went to school in this country. And however, this person who was giving her this feedback had just made the assumption that because she was, because she had, a last name that came from a certain, ethnic origin, that she was not a native English speaker. And so this person, even in telling me the story, had these questions at first in terms of, gosh, was I really a bad writer? Was it really me? Like, did I really not produce at the level that I was hired to produce? And had these questions. However, her story falls very neatly into one of the indicators of a broken culture, perceived underperformance. Regardless of who this woman was, the person giving her the feedback, this leader was never going to respect her work. Wow. Because she was automatically always going to see this person as an underperformer. Yeah. She basically looked at this person's ethnicity as, a placeholder for performance. And so for this individual, and she had a very interesting strategy. She felt as though I need to make sure that I'm getting other feedback from other people. And most importantly, I actually want to start creating more external visibility from this organization. Not necessarily that she wanted to leave immediately, but she wanted to make sure that she was counterbalancing the negativity that she was, receiving in her workplace with more positive support and recognition in other places. So she got heavily involved in the bar associations. The bar associations, those are our professional associations as lawyers. And she was able to eventually transition from that firm to another place where she landed quite well and had a flourishing career. And so I think it's important that when we do find ourselves to be on the receiving end of any of these top 10 indicators of a broken workplace culture, it's so important to do the self-assessment and really start saying, did I contribute something to this? What did I contribute to this? And what could be real in this situation? What's truly another story that could be taking place here? And then not losing or giving up your power. So often people would, automatically say, you know what, I'm immediately out of here, or I just can't work under these conditions. And they leave without really having a plan for departing. They give up their power and their leverage. Yeah. I knew this group of, employees who were leaving their organizations, and they were so happy to be leaving their organizations to go to a different one, that when they all sat down to talk about, having lunch, and they'd all landed at this one organization, they all sat down and they started talking about how did they onboard. And they all said they did not negotiate their salary, all because they were so eager to leave their organizations. And they were so grateful that another organization was taking them. Now, mind you, these were all people who graduated from Columbia, Harvard, you name it. These people all had felt very much beaten down by the organizations that they were leaving. And they had allowed the organizations to sap them of their leverage. I think it's important to do a leverage check. And then also, Denise, I'm really big on having a personal board of directors. Right. Your personal board of directors should reflect the 4 different quadrants of your work life. And look, I think if Apple, Google, and Amazon all have a board of directors, look, any publicly traded corporation in this country is required to have a board of directors. Why? Because the board protects shareholder interests. If you, as the employee, don't have a personal board of directors, who's protecting your interests? Yeah. And so those 4 different seats that I believe you should have on your personal board of directors, you should have a CEO, someone who has served as a CEO or a very senior leader, because this is the person who helps you to convert emotional language into business language. Helping you to reposition how you're framing thoughts and ideas, and how you will actually gain more credibility with the people that you're hoping to persuade internally in your organization. Number 2, you should have someone who's an insider, someone who understands your market in ways that you may not even foresee. Third, you should have someone who is what I call the contrarian. It's difficult. Now, mind you, all of these people on your board are people who want to see you succeed. These are people who you trust and people who you find to be credible. But it's that, it's that contrarian. A lot of times people will say that their spouse or their partner is the contrarian in their lives. But the contrarian is that person who will identify your blind spots. And they'll hold a mirror up to you and ask you the questions of, well, what if this other situation exists? Or what if your truth isn't necessarily what's really happening. And then lastly, I'm a little biased. I do believe that your personal board should have a seat for an employment lawyer or a human resource professional.
Yeah.
We could write the book on what happens in workplaces. We've seen so much. We're the people who help you to, make sure that you're not sending that poorly worded email at 2:00 in the morning.
Okay.
These are, these are the people who are going to really help you understand how and why and where emotions can get in the way of protecting your employment rights. So those are the 4 seats. I look at it very formally. However, if you don't have a personal board, you should at least have some people in your life who you can pressure test questions with and make sure are a part of your community.
Yeah, no, I really love that. Thank you for sharing that. And actually, it reminds me, I did this AmeriCorps program, like very first, professional job as a young professional. It was called Public Allies, and it was an AmeriCorps program. And then they had us do a personal board of directors too. So I think that's cool that you promote that, because I feel like I've never heard it even outside of that. So I wonder how many people even think to like put together their own personal board of directors. But yeah, it's incredibly helpful, I think, even just to have like cheerleaders for you, rooting you on as you're going through your journey. So yeah,
absolutely.
That.
It's interesting. I was also AmeriCorps, but I was
AmeriCorps
cool. many years ago.
Okay. No, that's cool.
So I'm wondering, did they take my concept?
I don't know. No, so to age me, I did Public Allies back in 2007. So it was also many years ago.
I did AmeriCorps in the 90s.
Okay, cool. No, well, I'm so happy to hear that you're part of the AmeriCorps family. And I don't know if you get a chance to, actually, a lot of people in this podcast as my guest are part of the AmeriCorps family, specifically with Public Allies too, because I think it's amazing, just like, the change and stuff. And, it did so much for me as a participant that I was their recruitment director for, I was with the AmeriCorps basically for like 10 years. But yeah, and I'm cool to, it's great to see that connection. But, next I'd love to talk with you about your book. So can you tell us what inspired you to write Exclusion?
So Exclusion, Strategies for Improving Diversity in Recruitment, Retention, and Promotion. It was born out of this idea of, as an employment lawyer, looking at daily situations where I'd have people who were beaten down in the workplace, emotionally, psychologically, sometimes even physically. And sometimes, and more often than not, I was not able to take their cases, not because they had financial constraints or not because I didn't want to, but because legally I really didn't, they didn't have a case for me to file. In other words, sometimes the issues of unfairness that they were bringing to me were not in violation of the law. And so, for example, there was this individual who in my book, spoke about how he felt marginalized in his organization and he felt discriminated against in his workplace because he worked for a boss who just didn't have a good sense of how do you even engage as a person with other people. So this leader would walk into the office and not say good morning to him. This leader would, basically try to find ways, as he would describe it, to ignore him. Does it feel uncomfortable? Absolutely. But until this person could say or tell me that the supervisor was denying him good work opportunities or quality work assignments or, was in some way sidelining him, there really wasn't anything I could do with that. And so I would call it your garden variety discrimination. It's not discrimination that is unlawful, because for it to be unlawful, it has to violate Title VII, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Age Discrimination and Employment Act, those kinds of statutes.
Right.
And those statutes really hinge upon a protected class being the basis for how and why you're being mistreated and being subjected to unequal terms and conditions of employment. Without that, as an employment lawyer, there really wasn't much that I could do. But I knew that there were these instances where people did feel marginalized, pushed to the edges of their organization, and not given the same kinds of, care that other people were. A good example was this woman who she fell into the bucket of not having an informal mentor. And actually, no, her situation was the inability to recover from mistakes. She would, create projects and look for feedback from the people who had assigned her projects and never get that feedback. Meanwhile, others were more coached and mentored.
Right.
It's unfair that it was happening. However, if she went to the people that, I hate to say it this way, but if she took the initiative and actually spoke to the people who assigned her the work and they still decided to not give her the coaching, that's maybe where I could be able to be of help. But with her just simply feeling powerless and not taking the initiative and just saying, well, I'm being mistreated, it's unfair, but it's not unlawful. And so I wanted to create an opportunity for people to understand what this looks like in their workplaces, because it's something that most of us would never imagine could happen to us. And so therefore, we're very unprepared for it. It's something that we don't have a script for. It's something that we flounder when it does happen. And my goal was to assist people with making sure that they at least had awareness. But then ultimately, I also wanted to make sure that employers could understand what was getting in the way of all of these grand initiatives that they had about workplace improvement. As you talk about creating these high-performing environments, it's very difficult to create a high-performing environment when your people don't feel as though they're cared for, and where people can't feel a love for your organization if they don't feel as though they're a part of your organization. And so I wanted to give supervisors and leaders information that could help them to tweak how and where they were engaging in some of those indicators of a broken workplace culture.
Right. No, thank you for sharing that. I really love that. And can you share what is one strategy from the book that you believe every professional should know?
Strategy that every professional should know is, that's a good one. Because there's so many.
Okay. You're saying nice. You like I love, just, for people being new to your work too. Anything that you'd like to share, I'd love to leave that open for you.
I think that it's important for people to, number one, like I said, understand that there are these indicators, to familiarize yourself with, what they look like. But then also, not just simply to familiarize yourself, but to make sure that you take action in your own careers to protect yourself when you see them happening and if you feel them happening. And so being able to have those conversations with your supervisor, sometimes to express, I mean, of course, you're not going to accuse anyone of engaging in a top 10 indicator of a broken culture. You're not going to do that. But sometimes just having the conversation to say, I'm really interested in staying in this organization. I'd love to thrive in this organization. And I want to move forward with, certain projects. Taking the initiative is something that sometimes really does go a long way. And helping people to say, okay, maybe I will invest more time in this person. Because as I mentioned, one of the indicators was lack of informal mentoring. So oftentimes in an organization, people will mentor you if they feel as though you remind them of themselves when they were younger. If they feel as though you remind them of their child, that there's some sort of sense of familiarity. And sometimes, if you don't look like that person, if there's not that characteristic that creates that feeling of similarity, you most likely will not get the same access to informal mentoring that other people might. And so in those situations, that's where that initiative really comes into play, because that's what helps to reset the narrative of, okay, I might not remind you of yourself when you were my age, but I'm someone who is here to make you look good. And I can do that if we work well together. If I can get access to quality work assignments, if I can understand how and where I might have gone wrong with the work assignment, I am here and dedicated to work with you.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I really love that. And, thank you so much for your time and sharing all these wonderful insights and wisdom. I definitely learned a lot from you, and I know that my listeners will as well. But something that I want to do with this podcast too is have people walk away with like tangible steps that they can show up in their own communities or help to, address whatever issues that, my guests are bringing up. So with that, for listeners who want to be a part of creating more just workplaces, what's one action that they can even take even within this next week or so?
Listening.
Mm.
So if you're a leader, it is incumbent upon you to listen to your people.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we all have deadlines and we all have huge workloads. We're all checking email on vacation. Well, actually, I'm not, but many of my colleagues do.
Okay.
I understand that
Right.
it can be taxing, but you have to listen to your people. Admittedly, I was leading a team once in where I wasn't really listening to certain pockets of my team. And something just was amiss with, some of the members of my team. And I wanted to make sure that I tackled that I really could tap into it. And so I conducted a 360.
Okay.
360, similar to a Gallup poll. I wanted to understand, how was my organization, how was my team experiencing me? And I realized that the same issues that I had with certain team members, they had with me.
Okay.
And so it was incumbent upon me to find a new and different way to listen to my people. And so while I might not have the time to meet with everyone for 1 hour, we started micro meetings. A micro meeting was that first 15 minutes of the workday. We'd all meet. We were hybrid, so we'd all meet on Zoom. Most of us wouldn't turn on our cameras because we still had, curlers in our hair. But the goal was no one could feel as though they didn't know what the priorities for the day were. And that ultimately, if anyone had any concerns, I'd always end the meeting with, can I do anything? What can I do for you?
Okay.
So I'd always start the meeting with, what do you need me to know about you today? And interestingly enough, people would tell me about, well, I'm studying for this, and it was wonderful. We talk about the meat and substance of the organization, and I would end by making sure I understood, making sure people felt as though they didn't have that black hole of information on their team, in their leader. And so some people would hang back and say, look, I'm having this issue with this coworker. I need you to, intervene some way, somehow. Because once again, as a leader, if you're not listening to your people, how can you truly show them that you're supporting them?
Right.
If I don't feel supported and if I don't feel cared for, and Denise, think about it. If you don't feel cared for and if you don't feel supported, would you love your organization?
Yeah, no, it'd be a rough place to work at, especially if you don't feel that care and support.
And if you don't feel cared for or support, how innovative are you going to be for your organization? And I don't want to put you on the spot, Denise, but most of us, if we don't feel as though we're cared for, supported, and if we feel constantly as though these 10 indicators are getting in the way and blocking our ability to feel like a part of the organization, we're most likely taking our treasure and talent elsewhere.
Yeah, no, I think that's important for folks to know too. Just the benefits of just treating people right, which I wish that people would do anyway. But yeah, it also does have that impact. I agree too with the workplace culture. But thank you again so much for your time. But just lastly, where can people learn more about your work and stay connected with you?
Thank you, Denise. It's been a pleasure being on your show.
Yeah.
People can learn more about me at natalieholderspeaks.com.
Okay.
And I'm actually in the process of creating an assessment in where if you're a leader who's curious as to whether or not that you have a workplace culture that might be broken, it'll be a 5-minute assessment or a very quick assessment, 2 minutes or less, in where you can, assess where is your organization on the continuum in terms of being a broken workplace culture. And if you're an employee working in an organization where you wonder, are these people broken? You can also take that assessment.
Okay. No, wonderful. Thank you so much again. I had such a wonderful time talking with you, and I wish you nothing but the best moving forward. As I've said, you're doing incredible work. I think making a lot of impacts, and I know people would have a lot to learn from you. But yeah, I hope to stay connected with you, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Denise. All the same as well.
Thank you. Okay, bye. Thank you for being here and tuning in to Voices That Propel Us, stories of justice, action, and community. Your presence in this movement matters. If today's conversation moved you, share it, talk about it, and keep the work going. Together, we're not just imagining change, we're making it. Until next time, stay bold, stay grounded, and stay in the fight.
Every time I feel so mad and sad and bad, I say to myself, relax, lean back, it's a brand new day. And every time I feel so down that a frown is all